Hello and greetings everyone. Now today I wanted to talk about a topic that many of you may have heard of, many of you may be involved in, some of you may never have heard, and that is the Fanon or Fandom canon of Star Wars. Now typically many people know the word headcanon, and that is basically your own personal interpretation, usually with changes, minor or major, to the official lore that everybody knows. Um, Usually it's things like explaining things in a way that you like or that makes sense to you, and there is probably new characters that you made yourself and stuff like that. Now, typically speaking, that's totally fine. There's no problem with that. The issue with Fanon is that this is not someone's headcanon, but this is the widely accepted among fans version of things, which means that Fanon is technically speaking canon because it's not just one person feeling that way or seeing it that way, but a vast majority of the fandom believing this to be the case. Now, when does Fanon come into place? It's usually when the writers of or creators of something leave a lot of open ends, a lot of interpretation, a lot of unclearness, or if there is direct conflicts in the lore that can't be solved because they are directly opposed to each other and only one of them can be true. Now, in terms of Star Wars, that is sadly rather typical. The main issue that I've already talked about with Star Wars canon is that there's different levels of canon, yet everything exists still. It's still out there, it's still official products made by official writers, and you can't just ignore or hand wave things away because they don't come directly from George Lucas when there's physical evidence that these things are there. Now, the problem with Star Wars is that there is quite a lot of conflicts. As example, what Lucas said about the Force is directly contradicted by, first of all, later works of Lucas. And I made video about those. Like, Lucas' original idea of the Force was that the Force is balanced and anything unbalanced is the dark side, and there is no gray side because the gray side is the Force, and there's no light side either because the light side is the Force. Now, later on in Star Wars Clone Wars TV show season 3, episode 15, I think, the Mortis arc, basically he contradicted that himself directly by creating characters and symbols and signs that show a grey side of the Force and put the light side and the dark side as unhealthy extremes, and that you need to balance these extremes out for life to flourish. That's basically Lucas himself saying that later on. Yet many fans didn't get the memo or disregard the entire arc because it's not well written. I actually had an argument with that recently. And just because something is badly written doesn't make it non-canon or doesn't make it that it didn't happen. It's just bad writing. The original trilogy, in my opinion, had a lot of very bad writing that relied mostly on plot armor, insane luck, very convenient circumstances, and did a lot of opened up a lot of plot holes, directly went against science and what was realistic, and it just was badly written. It wasn't a bad story. The story was fantastic. The hero's journey was good. The characters were good. But the writing left a lot open for improvement, let's say. Now, with that being said, the Fanon is the attempt of fans to do away with those conflicts and those contradictions in the lore. As example, Lucas also said that lightsabers weigh 40 kilos and that there are blades made of, well, light, like lasers, and completely ignore how they function, and contradicted that directly because in the movies we see anything but a lightsaber. We see plasma swords in the movies, and later on Lucas, I think, turned around on that and said, well, okay, it is plasma blades because that just makes so much more sense on how they behave and how they can be wielded and stuff like that, yada yada. There is many changes that were made over time, like how certain things work, how certain characters were viewed. As example, Anakin got a huge arc later on that was leading up to Vader. Obviously, there were many outright contradictions that can't be true at the same time, like statements that Yoda made, or statements that other characters made that directly conflict with the lore, or which statements that other characters did say. Prime example is Obi-Wan with his quote, "Only Sith deal in absolutes," which became a meme because by his own standards, Obi-Wan would have been a Sith uttering that statement. Also, it's not true because the Sith don't only deal in absolutes, and it's quite often the Jedi that deal in absolutes. So we have a statement in lore, in character, that contradicts and conflicts with other statements made and conflicts with things that we see in the lore. A great example of this is how the official statements are that the Rule of Two era Sith are more powerful than any Sith before them. That Bane was right and that the Force is a venom, and by stopping the dilution of the Force, it became more and more potent, and that Palpatine is the penultimate Sith with the ultimate power, the most powerful Sith to ever exist. That's the official statement. Yet what we see depicted in movies, in comics, in video games, and so on and so forth, is that there is actually a constant degradation in the galaxy, that from the earliest beginnings of the galaxy with the Celestials down to the Rakata, the Ancient era, the Old Republic era, the Palpatine era, the Luke era, the post-Luke era, things go downhill constantly. There's no improvement in technology, society, force powers. It all goes down and down and down and down. Now, from a narrative perspective, that makes perfect sense because entropy is a natural law and the dark side is strong, and there is many things that just go downhill. The Jedi keep failing and failing and failing, and so on and so forth. From a perspective of real world coming into place here, it also makes sense because power creep is a thing, and it happens to all franchises. So newer works tend to show things and do things that were unimaginably powerful in the original. You see that in, say, Naruto, Dragon Ball, whatever. Things just get more powerful as time progresses, usually. And since most video games came out way after the original works, the comics came out later than the original works, there is a power creep happening. And in Star Wars it's not that bad because in special newer works tend to rein it in a little bit more again, so that each era has its separate power levels. There is no character in the Palpatine Clone Wars era that is inherently more powerful than the Old Republic ones, and there's no Old Republic character that's inherently more powerful than the Ancient Sith. So there is some consistency in that regard, and what we see in the galaxy is that as time progresses, things go downhill. Now that's directly conflicting and contradicting with the official statements that the Rule of Two Sith were stronger than any before, and this entire idea Bane had is contradicted. I did an entire video about that. I don't want to say everything again and again and again. The short of it is that Bane didn't factor in that there's other dark side users than just the Sith, so his very idea was already flawed from the beginning. It was based on a complete misinterpretation of Revan's Rule of Two, and most importantly, it turns out he was wrong, because as the time progressed, the Sith actually became weaker and weaker and weaker. They didn't face as many challenges as they used to, didn't have the need to grow, yada yada yada. Point being, they lost a lot of knowledge. Point being, the official statement that Palpatine was the strongest Sith ever directly is contradicted by, say, Valkorion / Vitiate / Tenebrae and basically many other Old Republic Sith. It's directly conflicting with what we see what Tulak Horde was capable of, or Makar Ragnos or other ancient Sith were capable of. It's directly contradicted by, say, the Rakata, though I would say the Rakata weren't Sith, so okay, I let that pass, and clearly the Celestials weren't Sith either. So, but just from the perspective of the Sith, the ancient Sith were pretty much, most of them were more powerful than Palpatine. Many of the Old Republic Sith were more powerful than Palpatine. So what we see depicted on screen is directly contradicting what was said in interviews and what was the basis, and same goes for the gray force and stuff like that. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that there is many contradictions from official sources, what is said in interviews or depicted in certain stories, that directly conflict with what we see in other stories and can read in other interviews. This is something that usually happens with franchises that become bigger than the original creator. If there's just one creator, there's usually little conflict because it's just one person with one idea producing one story. Now, if that's said, that doesn't mean that that is always the safe route. Like George R.R. Martin contradicted himself in some occasions. So, and people can change their mind later on and then try to retcon things they didn't like. World of Warcraft original writer did that also. So that can happen. But the more people are working on a project, the more likely it is that their statements and views conflict with each other, and that the idea of what the Star Wars is or what the characters are conflict. And in Star Wars, that was never really solved. I mean, Lucas's attempt to solve this was to say, I'm the creator, whatever I say goes first. If anything else contradicts with my view, it doesn't count. That was his way of dealing with that, which is probably the worst way to deal with criticism or anything, because Lucas himself made a lot of pretty bad mistakes that the fans absolutely hated, like the midichlorian thing. And the Wills thing that he planned would probably have been much worse, because it's basically the midichlorians all over again, just in a little bit more detail. With that said, the fandom is now faced with the problem that multiple writers, multiple works officially published. I'm not talking about fan fiction here. I'm saying officially published with seal of approval of George Lucas himself, made by LucasArts, made by Lucasfilm, or companies that they officially licensed and okayed their products with strict guidelines they had to adhere to, and there's still lots of conflicts because many people worked on it. And I, as many fans, am not a fan of hand-waving away things that actually exist in official Star Wars lore just because it wasn't said by George Lucas directly or conflicts with something else that was established before. The fans usually try to work around those issues and come up with explanations why, after all, this plot hole isn't a plot hole, why, after all, this special conflict isn't actually a conflict, or how they can resolve such issues. A great example is one I made with the Grey Force thing. The main in-world statements that we have, that the Force is the balance and there is no dark or light side, and better said, there is no light side, because the light side is the balanced side and the dark side is the unbalanced side. All of those statements come from the Jedi, in special in the movies Yoda. And the Jedi are known to be wrong, they are known to make mistakes, they are known to not be that wise, they are known to get the Force wrong, which some of them did. Yoda has been, and the Jedi all have been brainwashed since their earliest childhood into believing this system, this doctrine, this faith. And if you have 900 years of being brainwashed and being the big boss of the religious organization and probably a zealot yourself, Yoda isn't a reliable source. That's it. Yoda might just be wrong. He isn't the only one known in the Force. Indeed, he only knows one side of the Force really well. Now, he has a little bit of experience with the dark side, but that's almost nothing. And he makes these big statements of how the world works. That's basically like, I don't know, a biologist who has absolutely no experience in any other field and maybe had one afternoon seminar on physics talking quantum physics and how biology is the more real thing or whatnot. So and quantum physics don't count or something. So Yoda's statement is in character, and in character statements are luckily in a position that they just can be outright wrong. No character is all-knowing or all-powerful and anything like that. So in-character statements can indeed be contradicting the official lore or the Fanon or whatever, because they don't have to be true. In-character statements are just that. It's the opinion of single characters. Now, sadly, most people in that are not familiar with works beyond the TV screen adaptations take Yoda's word and run with it, because that's pretty much the thing that we see depicted on screen in most instances, while ignoring that, again, on screen we are only following the Jedi and their views and their stories, so obviously it's one-sided. Obviously there's some bias there. And in the Fanon, they try hard to solve these conflicts and take many sources and see which sources are more reliable. As example, if you stick with the on-screen and grey force thing, the Father, which is basically a force entity, a sentient force entity that is the force itself, that knows the light and the dark side and keeps them in check, he is way more credible in world than Yoda is, because he is not only much more ancient and much more wise, he knows the Force way better than Yoda ever will, and he is basically a sort of divine entity. Obviously his knowledge is vastly superior to Yoda's, and it is directly approving many statements that Darth Vader made, whose knowledge on the Force is also better than Yoda's. And most importantly, it's what we see, because we have grey Force using characters and orders, and if Yoda was right, that couldn't be the case, but they are there, they are physically in the galaxy, they're doing their thing, and so how can that not exist just because Yoda said so, when it's clearly there? The Fandom really did some amazing work of solving conflicts like that. There is so many YouTube channels dedicated to doing just that. Channels with millions and millions of followers that are super successful, have been going on for a decade or longer, that their only stick is that they make Fanon and try to explain things. And I have to say, those channels are not single people either, those are teams, those are people that run entire forums and discuss with other fans and share their views. And I mean, we have 5 decades of fan speculation and talking to each other and polls and whatnot, and the result of that is the Fanon, where fans that know the lore have agreed on certain courses of action to explain away problems in the storytelling and try to make a coherent story that actually fits and doesn't leave huge mistakes, plot holes or contradictions open. Now, in a debate I had recently, the problem is that, as example, Grey Jedi, there is never in the official sources, not once, the term Grey Jedi being used. Not one time. But we do have lots of Jedi that use the dark side, not just temporarily, but over prolonged periods of time. Not because they fell, but as a standard modus operandi. We have Jedi that are very close to, relatively close to the dark side. We have Sith that become Jedi later on and continue using both sides of the Force. We have fallen Jedi that, technically speaking, are now Darksiders that still use the light side. So what are these characters if not grey? And the whole idea that came around is that the Jedi adhere to a certain code, which is completely correct, and I would agree to the point that you cannot be a Jedi without following the Jedi code and adhering to the Jedi tenets. And if you do, you are a Jedi, no matter if you are directly affiliated with the Order or not. As example, Ahsoka left behind the Jedi Order and says she is no Jedi, yet she's still adhering to the teachings of the Jedi, which makes her a believer in the Jedi religion, because that's also something many don't know. Jedi aren't just light side Force users. Jedi is a religion, and you can be a Jedi that has no Force powers at all. That happens. You can leave the Order and still be a light sider. There's no contradiction there. It's You can't become, say, a Jedi Knight without Force powers. That's impossible. But you can certainly be a Jedi without having Force powers. Same goes for the Sith, by the way. You can be a Sith without Force powers. There's no requirement for that. The requirement is adherence to the Sith religion, which includes a Sith pantheon of gods, which even Darth Vader adheres to, and following the Sith tenets, which really aren't all that difficult to follow, because they're more like suggestions, because the ultimate tenet of the Sith is freedom, being yourself, being who you are, and that's not that difficult. It's a philosophy. Same for the Jedi. Their code, however, is much more strict and much tougher to follow. Now, with all of that said, the fandom created so many, like, there is an essay of I think like 20 pages just for Sith naming conventions and how to create a Sith name that fits a character. I spent days coming up with my name, trying to stick to all conventions of Sith naming rituals, without creating something that was already taken, which, to be fair, was pretty difficult because the first 10 ideas that I had were all already taken. Now, with that said, the Fanon made, sometimes we have 8-hour-long videos explaining problems with the writing and how the Fanon solves a single issue. We have many videos that are half an hour to 4 hours long, explaining some certain things. We have podcasts where these issues are discussed and fans try to come to an agreement and to solve some problems in the writing and in the lore. And I personally wouldn't handwave away the Fanon, because again, the writers are plainly conflicting with each other at times. Sometimes they don't even know what the other writers already wrote. Christy Golden is a perfect example for a writer who doesn't read other writers' work and just does her own thing, doesn't care if it conflicts with something someone else already said. And the fans that know more about the Star Wars universe than most single writers do, they try to sum it all up, summarize it, and remove all conflicts with their own canon. And that is the Fanon that I personally think is one of the greatest things, and what's really keeping Star Wars together, alive, and most importantly, without major issues. And yeah, what do I say? The Fanon sometimes ignores official statements. As said, obviously Palpatine is said to be the most powerful Sith ever, but he is not shown to be the most powerful Sith ever, not even close. And thus there is a conflict, and the Fanon solves it by basically saying, well, obviously what we see counts, and what we are told doesn't matter if it conflicts with something that we see, which is, as example again, lightsabers that we see on screen don't behave like lightsabers at all, not even in the slightest. And that's why we throw out the statement that lightsabers are as George Lucas said they are, because that's clearly not what we see in his own works, by the way. And he later came around and rectified that as well. It just took, I think, 2 or 3 decades to do so. It's getting really rambly, isn't it? Now, long and short of it, the fandom is big, and there is many brilliant minds coming together, discussing things, polling, and trying to come up with solutions. And usually big polls are the deciding factor of what is considered in the Fanon as true and what is not. Now, obviously, as with any fan-made stuff, there is no official, oh, that's the right path, that's the one. You just have paths that are agreed upon by most fans, and some variants and variations and other explanations that only few fans adhere to. Are any of these wrong? Not outright, no. They can't be proven wrong, because again, they are directly conflicting with the official material to begin with, because they try to explain away the issues with the original material. So you have different versions of Fanon. You have Fanon that, as said, millions of fans agree upon, which I would take as the right source, because most experts, just like in science, most experts agree that's the right thing and that's what you should stick with. If a few experts say something else, it doesn't mean they are wrong, just like in science. It's just they are probably having the worst explanation, and you can stick with and go with whatever you want, basically. You just should be certain that you aren't the only person believing in that path. Also, when you're creating your own character, you should be aware of the lore and try to not create further conflict and issues. Like, one of the biggest issues I see in the role-playing variant is that people just have to create a character that is friends with or related to a major story character, and that creates problems. If Luke or if Vader had another child, that would have come up in the canon, that would have been of some importance. If say you are best friends with Revan and Malak and Valkorion, how does a character do that when those people clearly hate each other? Like, you see where I'm trying to go to. It's complicated. You can't do that. You can have special characters. You can have snowflake characters, no problem. What you have to keep in mind is that you're not creating any lore contradictions, and that for anything that might be controversial, you have an explanation ready. As example, my own character, Darth Boreas, is a Chiss, and Chiss are usually not known to be all that force sensitive. Now, Chiss do have force powers, mostly the females though, and mostly navigational, while they are in their own region of the galaxy. There are Chiss Jedi, and once the Chiss leave their area of the galaxy and come to the main galaxy, they suddenly have some force powers, or the force powers become stronger. There's Chiss that have awakened to the force after leaving Chiss space, and we also have an in-lore explanation of why that is, because the people that created the distortions and anomalies and black holes in the Sith region wanted to make it impenetrable to certain dangers outside the galaxy and trap certain beings in there, like the force wraiths and stuff like that. And so they deliberately made a force suppressing field, which is the main reason why so few Chiss are force sensitive. Also, the Chiss are technically speaking the same as humans. They just evolved into a different, not even species, they're more human variant, because the only reason Chiss have blue skin is because the minerals on the home planet that are in the water make their skin go blue. You can have that in real life too. There's this Papa Smurf guy that actually turned his own skin blue by drinking a certain mineral daily. That can happen. So the Chiss should be on average just as force sensitive as the humans are. The humans in Star Wars are one of the most force affinity having species out there. So why are the Chiss so low in force sensitivity? Well, because they are growing up in a force suppressing field, and that's why many Sith that leave that space suddenly start to have force powers. And there is Chiss Jedi in the lore. So why couldn't there be a Chiss Sith in the lore? And my Chiss now, the Chiss exile force sensitives that aren't the navigational type or kill them outright. They usually kill force sensitives in their own species outright because they believe that is sick and basically a danger to their society. And it doesn't matter if it's light, dark side, whatever. If you're force sensitive in Chiss home planet of Scylla, you'll get killed. Or, like my character, you flee and go into exile and hide away somewhere else. And joining up with the Sith seems to be a good idea to avoid getting killed by the Chiss ascendancy. You can have influence in the Empire, and you can be valuable enough that maybe the Chiss ascendancy decides to let you live after all, because you have become a vital resource, because the Chiss are, at the end of it, logical beings that won't just throw away important resources. So my character also has a lot of ice powers, and while ice powers in the Force do absolutely exist in Star Wars, see my other video, they are rather rare. However, a Chiss that grew up grew up on a glacial planet, was exposed a lot to dark side forces, and spent most of his life on an icy homeworld. I mean, the Chis bodies adapt to deal with the cold. They have red eyes because they see in the infrared spectrum. That's technically speaking a force power called hypothermia that anyone can develop, and Chis just have that. So I don't see too much contradiction there, though I will admit it is a very special case and a very special character, and I am okay with you not accepting that character existing if it's too much trouble for you and your idea of Star Wars. That said, I don't think it violates any major... I don't think he violates any canon or anything. It's just in need of some serious explaining to do, just like his permafrost sabers that he's using. Permafrost sabers are very rare, but they do exist, and if there is any in existence, then first of all, there's official permafrost crystals on Hoth. There may be some on Ilum, though that's a bit less likely, and there's other ice worlds that have permafrost crystals on them, and Xilla is not known to have them, but there's no real reason why there shouldn't be, given that it's also rather steep in the dark side, which permafrost crystals sort of are. So yeah, that was a long thing. Fandom is great, and the fans do fantastic work trying to solve the issues, and that's also something I spoke about in my sources video. There's many fantastic great YouTube channels that do their best to work out these conflicts and bring up a version that actually works, and that's what I stick with, and that's what I personally adhere to a lot myself, because I came across these issues in the lore myself, and I like the explanations that some people have come up with. I have, to my knowledge, not made up my completely own headcanon except for my characters, and I'm usually sticking with something else that the larger fan base agrees with, if I agree with it too, which quite often is the case. So now, if that's said, it's up to you if you accept Fanon or not. That's an individual choice. But I believe in the so-called wisdom of masses. If you don't know, that's a fact in psychology. While singular people can be insane idiots, if you have a large enough mass of people, then the average will average out, and the masses actually make pretty decent decisions. Not brilliant decisions, because that's also often limited to single people who are geniuses, but on average the majority is a pretty solid choice to go with and has a pretty good idea of what to do. That's the wisdom of the masses. That's a real thing, and that's why I think the Fanon is great, because in the Fanon you don't have like 24 of writers contradicting each other, but you have millions of people that know more than most of these writers do and come to a conclusion that is drawn through debate and years of discussing and just trying to come to the truth of it. So that's what I'm going to say about the Fanon. I hope you have a fantastic day, and may the force be with you.